utilize the seeking to embody the presence. Don't just try to get rid of the seeking. There's a reason that seeking is there. It's escape from the unprocessed. If you miss that opportunity, that's a great opportunity to see that the seeking is coming from the trauma and to process it and begin to heal, not just awaken, but to heal from the trauma. You can utilize the seeking to begin the healing process from the beginning. But you don't really do that very well if you just try to end the seeking and don't see its connection to trauma.
Welcome, Scott. Thank you so much for coming to the show. I'm so excited to have you here today on this podcast called Awakening Now. And I'm speaking today to Scott Kiloby. And for many of people, this name is well known and the work is amazing. The Kiloby Inquiries has got a lot of following. And I'm so happy to be speaking to you today.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so the show is called Awakening Now. And for starters, I would like to ask you, what is your definition of awakening? Because it can mean many things to different people.
Yeah, so awakening for me is the process of recognizing presence, the ground of being, and some seeing that what I thought was me isn't me. So mind and body, thoughts, feelings, sensations are coming and going to me. I'm not those things. But for me, awakening has to include the embodiment. That's what I was saying earlier. So it has to include bringing the awareness or the recognition down in the body because the root of suffering is there. The trauma and the repression is hidden there. So my definition has changed through the years. I probably would have just said it's a recognition of presence where you see whatever you see. But here it's an embodied realization is what I've seen. It's actually, it needs to be embodied or there's still suffering.
Right. Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you. And how long ago was that recognition for you? When did that happen?
It was 2007, so about 16 years ago was the initial recognition that started teaching, where I started teaching from there.
Wow. And can you tell a little bit about what happened, please?
Yeah. I had a few experiences. You know how we have these little shifts and experiences along the way, but there was definitely one shift in particular that changed everything. And it was late at night. I was tired, a little bit sleep deprived. For some reason, I had been hanging out with friends and I was just tired. But I was laying in the bed and I had this knowing actually that my dogs are not separate from me. It wasn't a thought. It was a knowing. It was felt knowing. It's like that, whatever that is, isn't separate. And then I got up off my bed and a thought came to me or an insight, but I never used these words. It was almost like it came from somewhere else, but I won't say that. But it just said consciousness just wants to see itself. And I never talk like that. If you look at Scott Kiloby's, I never talk like that. But that came up. And then I just walked around and saw that everything is me. Like, not me, but that there's no separation. And I couldn't find a place in the universe where that wasn't true. I mean, I looked everywhere, walking around everywhere, the sink, the street light, the trees, the carpet, the wall, the ceiling, my story, everything. There's no separation in any of it, in other words. That was really clear, but it wasn't embodied yet. So that was a really, really clear experience. It shifted into a different perception, but it just hadn't been embodied yet. And that was the beginning of that process of embodiment, really.
Yeah. So a lot of people are having that kind of glimpse that something changes, the perception changes, everything flows freely. Wow, and then it closes down and that's it. But that's how seeking starts, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, at least for me, it started that way. I had a glimpse to this beingness, just no thoughts, just sitting, being, enjoying the moment. And then I wanted more. I wanted to find that place that I called feels like home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of things can happen along the way, as you know. Different people have different experiences. So I've had my own experience with that because I too wanted to discover home. But I had some stuff to process before I could really settle into this. And I think that's a big part of what you probably invited me to talk about today.
Yes, yes. Because it seems like, okay, it's like a magic pill. I awaken, and then everything is smooth and sweet and happy ever after. And that's just a fairy tale. The real work starts here. And I would like, I'm sorry, please.
Well, I mean, that to me is like one of the most important parts of the interview. If we can just pull that out and let everybody hear that, because you don't hear it a lot out there. You do more and more, but that's just really important that you just said that. And I just want to highlight that. So go ahead and finish. But I just want to make sure everybody heard that. That's all.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you to share about your work, how you guide people, how you teach people to integrate,
Yeah.
to look at these things that arise, to work, basically.
Yeah. So yeah, I've definitely changed the path or the way of pointing to what I call 3D inquiry mostly, which 3D inquiry, we don't actually point to awareness much anymore here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a place for that, but what I noticed that for myself, the pointing to awareness or the pointing to the no self, it's actually very helpful on one hand, but it can get people so fixated on the attainment and the recognition that that fixation itself is a way to avoid the trauma. It's like a distraction. So what we're saying at this path is that part of you that's seeking intensely, we can actually utilize that because that's the trauma. We can actually bring that to awareness skillfully, and that seeking energy becomes a way into reversing the emotional repression because the seeking is connected directly to the buried emotions. So that's one thing I'm doing with people is where other teachers are pointing back to presence when the seeking comes up. I'm showing them how to process that seeking to embody the presence at the same time. So the embodiment happens with the recognition here. It starts from the beginning. It's called the inside out path. And we start the processing of the trauma and repression from the beginning. And we teach people that the trauma and repression is the source of the forms of suffering in their life. And that once they become skillful, you'll see that the suffering is driven by the trauma. And once you see that it's driven by it, and you can make that unconsciousness conscious, which means bring the programming that's bearing emotions into awareness, the suffering at the visible level does go away. It does on this path. And I could never say that before because I was in a bypass. But when you get to the root of the suffering, which is the buried stuff, bring that stuff into awareness, then you're no longer forced to identify with the false stuff. See, because we have now to hold back what's true all of our life, so we're forced into identifying with the false stuff. So when we point to awareness, we might very well miss the thing that's producing identification and suffering. So we just have the awareness recognition. We still have trauma and repression producing the suffering. So you can't really say to people on a path like that, you have to be careful saying that the suffering will actually disappear because they're not getting to the root of suffering. We can say that here because we have the experience with it now. We know that we can do that. But you still have to be skillful. You have to be earnest. You can't be in a bypass and be wanting to avoid stuff. Well, we all are. But you have to be earnest to want to turn that into a skillful practice instead of just wanting to avoid. You have to catch it in yourself and become skillful. Otherwise, you just keep doing it. Even after we become realized, or initially, you know it too, we can still avoid and suffer. And so that's what I'm trying to tell people is like, take it seriously from the beginning, what I'm saying, because you'll have to take it seriously later if you don't. In my opinion.
Yeah, that whole cleanup process has to happen. Doesn't matter when, before, during, after. It has to happen. And what's interesting for me is, okay, when you just sit for a little bit, quietly, sit, then you start seeing something arising right away.
Right.
For most people, it's right away. Something is here. A thought, story, a worry, something is here. Okay, so these are easy to catch. Because when you are sitting here, and once these cleared, or once these self-released, right? Then there is more space in everyday living. There is more openness and stuff like that. And then stuff still keeps arising. That's what's interesting.
Right.
And it's more visible, more intense, maybe.
Can be.
Yeah, but how to get to these repressed parts is the question.
Yeah, that is,
How do you know that you have something repressed?
yeah.
What are the
I
symptoms?
mean, I could actually take your audience through an entire repression test that we
Oh,
created.
wonderful. Let's do that.
I mean, but the thing is, it would take too long, but I could do a little bit of it just on a couple of emotions, really common
Okay.
emotions like anger and sadness. And then what we'll go from there. Let's just do a little test to see if people in the audience have repression in the body, and then we'll talk about how we get to it.
Wonderful. Yes. Mm.
Okay. So yeah, just close your eyes, anybody listening. You actually don't have to get into a really deep meditative state. It's okay if you just kind of start where you're at, but at least bring awareness to the inner body a little bit and anchor into some of those sensations there. Just letting them be as they are to begin with. And especially in any area where you hold energy, say someone already knows they have a stomach contraction, so you might bring awareness to that. And what we're going to do is we're going to bring up what I call the VIPs, which are very important people who, influenced how we developed. So that's mom. Just pull these people up like they're sitting in the room with us, mom and dad, and any bullies, important relationships, romantic, just sitting in a room with all of our VIPs. And now we're resting with awareness, scanning the inner body here. So as we look at the VIPs, I want to start with say this several times as you feel into the body. I'm not angry at them for any reason. And say it several times. We say that that's revving up the repression that's hidden because this is contraction.
Mm-hmm.
So in other words, if you're an anger repressor, you wouldn't feel anger right here. You would feel contraction or anything but anger because your system's protecting us. So let's say somebody feels just a heart contraction. That's your body saying, I'm angry. But the emotion is frozen into a contraction along with the fear of that emotion is frozen in there. And then, so when you say, I'm not angry, there's also conditioning in there that sort of activates that. So anybody who gets a contraction, they're seeing evidence of repressed anger. If you find anger here, that would not be a repression. It would not be where we focus KI. We would be focusing on the contractions. So there's the
Wow,
first thing.
pretty clever. Wow.
Yeah,
I
right.
like that.
And I wish your audience was here. I could ask them questions about what came up, but without them being here, I'll just say that if anger comes up there, it's probably not a repression, but almost anything else is, unless you're in embodied presence. If you're just really embodied, then you might not have anything there. But most anything else is repression, we found.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
Okay.
I was testing myself.
Yeah. Good.
And my VAPs are fine. I think I'm a bit angry with myself, though.
Okay. Well, good to know. Let's go over to the vulnerable emotions because people tend to kind of side on one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Not always, but we tend to like had a family where vulnerable emotions weren't allowed, or a family where anger wasn't allowed, for example. So if we do the same test with, let's say, sadness and hurt, we just see our VIPs there. I'm not hurt by them for any reason. And I might say it several times to see if there's any response in the body. If you actually feel hurt here, it's not as repressed. It would be more like a contraction or like something other than an emotion. And some people would just want to test into sadness because it's close to that. So I'm not sad about anything. Again, if sadness gets invoked, not repressed. So we're looking for the show that we're frozen around there.
Mm-hmm.
So from there, we test out on all the emotions and traits that we might bury. And then what we do is we teach people how to bring the conditioning that's buried in the body, that buries those emotions, into awareness so that those layers of repression transmute. The body changes and the energy transmutes to presence over time. but it's just a skill. You can't just rest as awareness or any of those old ways. Like there's a specific skill that makes that programming in your body conscious behind that contraction.
Wow, very interesting.
Yeah.
It's like digging for treasures skillfully, not just random stuff, not just okay.
No, we're going
Like,
for the treasure. Yeah, the root.
uh-huh.
Yeah.
Wow. How did you come up with that?
Suffering.
So,
Lots of suffering. Yeah, I woke up to awareness like you, and then I was an anger repressor, and I sat in that peace for many years and without much motivation at all to
uh-huh.
check into anger in my body. But I had chronic pain that kept getting worse and worse. And it got to a place where I was actually suicidal because I didn't know how to heal it.
Oh.
And just being with it in awareness was incredibly painful because I couldn't distract myself in the old ways
Mm-hmm.
as easily. So I just had to sit there and feel it all the time. And by the time I became suicidal, I was so done with the usual way of pointing and talking about awareness that there's something new came in. And I just killed my teaching and my pointing and myself. I emptied myself of everything that I thought I knew about all this and just started from scratch and discovered what was going on in my body because I had to save my own life, essentially, so to speak. And then a teaching, a work got created as a
Mm.
result of it.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
It's often that somebody has to go to the bottom of the hole to start climbing up. So that
Yeah.
suffering there can be a disguised gift, really.
Totally a gift.
Yeah.
100% a gift. It really was. Yeah, I wouldn't change a thing about all that. No.
So for people
But
who are listening and they think I need to get rid of suffering, maybe you don't. Maybe that's the gift that needs to be received, honored, and something wonderful can happen once it's
I'm telling
accepted.
you, the way is not to get rid of suffering. This is my truth.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not expecting everybody to, but my truth is it's not the way. Because when we make the unconscious conscious, the visible suffering does go away. But it's not because we're trying, it's because we're finally open to feeling what we've been avoiding. That's why the suffering goes away, because the suffering is a false identification because we're holding back what's true. So when you allow what's true for you, it just means what's authentic for you.
Mm-hmm.
The false suffering goes away.
Right. When somebody, let's say, says, I hate my parents, they've been horrible
Yeah,
to me. And then they say, oh, I feel guilty because I hate my parents. So
right.
that's repressing it right there,
Yeah,
isn't it?
caring. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we come to the teachings or the practices thinking, I'm going to be able to wake up out of all this, but we don't necessarily go there. Many of us don't. And then we have the buried guilt and the hatred. So that, according to trauma research, is then producing, as we've said, more suffering. And it's just as simple as that. It's like we've got stuff we have to deal with from childhood that that's a reason why we're on the path. A lot of it is because of what happened when we were kids. We shouldn't be ignoring that, is my view,
Mm-hmm.
because that's ignoring the root of suffering, what has happened to us. But here's the thing.
Ah.
We can do it from awareness because there'll be people listening who think, well, I don't want to go back into the past and psycho and analyze and all that. We're not doing any of that. We're just going into the body where the unconsciousness is from within presence,
Mm-hmm.
and processing here. It's not really about a story of a person doing that or anything. So that's part of it is the awakening to the presence, because otherwise people will pick up a modality like that and just get really busy, trying to feel better or get rid of things when that's not what the modality is about. So we have to learn that the modality is about making the unconscious conscious. It's not about getting rid of things, but it just naturally comes up that we want to get rid of things. And we're telling people that that's the repression mechanism. That's the thing that's bearing emotions. The thing that wants to get rid of things on the path is the repression mechanism. So that's the thing, is what we're trying to tell people. If you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
get rid of things, you might very well be running on the trauma and repression.
Trauma
The trauma and
repression.
repression is running that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for these people with a lots of trauma, lots of it, it's quite difficult. And I
It
want to
is.
acknowledge that, that it's a lot of work.
I didn't either. That's the whole thing. I didn't want to acknowledge this. Can I just be honest with you? I didn't want to acknowledge my buried rage.
Mm.
I totally understand where people are with that. And that's the root of suffering, the buried emotion, in my view.
Mm. Yes. And for me, it was very significant to recognize that it is safe to feel what you feel, no matter what that is, no matter what
Yeah.
sensation is where in the body. It is
Yeah.
safe to feel it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of setting the stage for this unraveling, knowing that it's completely safe to feel, but not intellectually, like checking, is it safe to feel?
Yeah.
It is safe to feel. Yes. This intensity, this contraction, yeah, it's still safe to feel.
Yeah. And with the repression, we have some of the strongest conditioning that tells us it's not safe to feel it. So with my chronic pain and my anger repression, I had very strong conditioning that I was completely unconscious to for years until I finally was able to hear it. And basically it's saying, no, it's not safe. Don't. No, don't. It's very powerful conditioning. And it's responsible for the contractions to a large degree that we feel in our bodies. So we have to be really careful with that whole thing about, is it safe to feel it? Because the conscious mind will say a lot of things about that, but the unconscious is the one that's in control of it.
Mm-hmm.
The unconscious conditioning, if there's conditioning there that says anger or hurt is unsafe, that's very powerful conditioning, is what I'm saying.
Right.
And it's very difficult, if not impossible, to override that certainly through the thinking mind, but really you can't really override it very well just from the recognition of presence, because it's buried and it's keeping us safe and it's getting us to survive. So it really does. My point here is it takes skill, because listening itself will not even produce a lot of that conditioning. Just being very quiet with pain, sometimes the body will produce safer conditioning. It'll produce conditioning that is not associated directly with the buried emotions as a way to distract us from the buried emotions. So what I had to learn to do is more than listen and more than rest and more than just trust. I had to go and pull up unconscious stuff that was not arising to awareness.
Yeah, that's the interesting part.
Yeah.
Yeah, but for those people who are just starting this work, don't worry about that. Deal with what's arising easily.
Yeah, of course.
Well, it's immediately here. You don't need to go and dig just
Always.
yet. It will be the time for that.
Yeah. That's actually part of the path, is that when we're not in inquiry, we just be and allow, just like you're saying. Be and allow. It's when we go into inquiries, we go to a level. There's no levels. We go a level below what's visible is what you're seeing. You're seeing stories, shadows, feelings, but what's invisible below that, producing that, is where we're going. So what we say to people is the visible, yeah, allow it. Allow what you're seeing. The invisible is producing it. The unconsciousness is producing that.
Yeah. It's like the visible is a symptom. The deep issue is invisible. So we don't want to get rid of a symptom.
No.
Because it's helping, actually. It's a solution to the problem rather than, something to get rid of. But we need to go in and see what is there. That this symptom is saying, okay, look at me, rather than that, don't look there.
Yeah. I don't hear people saying that very often, that you use, and so true. You can use what arises and see more, because especially with this path, because for example, I had to see that I was repressing anger. I had to bring it into awareness to be able to work with that some. If I was denying it in myself, I couldn't have come out of repression. So by seeing it was really important, not to try to get rid of it, but to make it more conscious. And the more conscious I made it, the more it fell away. but not from the intention to get rid of it. It was just being curious, like my whole life trying to avoid it. Now I'm just curious. I want to know it more. I want to open to it because, well, it's a key to healing. That's why. But it's also just something that really needs to happen on an earnest path. We can't just be avoiding the whole time. The path has to be towards turning towards this stuff, I think. Even if you don't have chronic pain, I mean, in other words, earnestness probably requires us at a certain point to turn towards what we've been avoiding our whole life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. For me, in my experience, I never had any health problems yet. They will come.
Yeah.
It's unavoidable. But yeah, so I never had this strong suffering that I had to get rid of.
Interesting.
Yeah. I could see other people suffering, like my mom, for example. She was suffering so much that I had to run away to a different country. I could not take it. It's like, okay, bye, mom. I'll speak to you on the phone, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that suffering was here, but it was more about not being able to help close people to not suffer.
Yeah. Just curious, what drove you to the enlightenment path or the liberation path, and if you weren't seeking it that way?
Well, I had a glimpse. I took some magic mushrooms, and that night I died. Something died.
Oh, okay.
And it was like, oh my God, it's quiet. It's wonderful. I want that. So that's ignited this seeking. And I got really angry in the beginning because how come nobody told me that reality is not what I was told?
Right.
Like I was like, I had to know it, but I couldn't. So I was a bit like Neo, Googling, trying to find stuff, what's this reality thing, what are they talking about? So that was kind of the beginning. And then my life was kind of fun. It was normal life, nothing tragic, nothing too intense. Well, like normal everyday life with all ups and downs. But I knew that there's something else because of that glimpse. So that was the driving force for me. And yes, I had all kinds of problems. It wasn't easy, but it was okay, normal. Doing tattoos, having fun at work, going home, having a drink, this the rock and roll. Yeah.
Can I ask you a couple of questions? Because I want to post this on my page, and you have a lot of experience helping people too. And were you involved with Liberation Unleashed and helping people recognize no self at that some point?
Yes, that's kind of how it started.
Yeah, how it all started. Well, I would like, just for my own benefit and for my audience, to hear from you in terms of, so you had an awakening, as you said, and then what brought you to the recognition that embodiment needed to happen then for you? What happened?
Right. Let me think. I don't know.
Just a knowing of some sort, like just a.
Okay, that mushroom trip was a long time ago. This true awakening, true seeing that there is no Ilona running the show happened in 2010. I think you were around that time on Facebook, and that's how it all started. And since then, since that recognition, I thought, oh my God, everyone is looking for something. Everyone is looking for this. They don't know how to find it. I need to, just ring the bells and tell everyone, look here. There is no you as you think it is. There is no separate self. There is no self. Just what you need to do is look. So immediately I started to communicate with people because they heard me ringing the bells. They came and wanted to know. And my process was kind of through all these people, because somebody would come in with a problem or with a question or with emotion. And I was here to help them to resolve it. But it wasn't me doing it. It was.
Right. Of course.
it was the process. I'm here, there, we're having some kind of conversation, something happens. And as you said, you were addicted to this. I was addicted to this. I was totally addicted. It was so interesting, like to find out what's going on in people's minds and in people's hearts and how to resolve this. And then I started seeing patterns, like patterns. And when somebody comes in with a problem, I can recognize that in me. So it's not just releasing for them, it's releasing for me. And it kind of seemingly happened. Just practicing every day for years.
Well, so I guess my next question is, you were helping a lot of people recognize that initial seeing, whatever. What did you see in terms of their need to follow that up with processing and stuff? Because you've probably met with a lot of people. Can you tell my audience about that? What did you see? Yeah.
Well, Liberation Unleashed was focused, and it still is, hopefully, focused on one thing alone, seeing no self, recognizing non-separateness, no doer. In my words, everything is happening by itself. That's it. That's one thing.
Right.
And because everything is happening on its own, and it's always been like that, why would anything change? Nothing changes. It looks different, yes, but all these patterns, all these conditions, everything is still here. So the second question is, now what? Okay, things arise, what to do? Right. And it's just teaching and learning to meet whatever is arising without push and pull. Push and pull is resistance and trying to hold on or trying to push away or get rid of. In whichever variation everyone is doing that. Yeah.
Well, so Adyashanti says that because he's worked with so many people, that the vast majority of people, when they initially recognize they have some processing to do, and it's very rare in any generation for anyone not to have to do that. So what's your experience having worked with so many people? Because I agree with Adya, that's my experience, but I want to hear from you. Like, did many people need to process some stuff after that?
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And on the forum, when people come, they see what they see. They may go on guide, which is beautiful because they come back and serve. But yeah, that part is done. The other part is, you find what works for you. Some go to you, to Killer Being. Right. Some go to Byron Katie. Somebody else goes to Buddhist teachings or fetters, or I created or kind of started working with what I call deep looking process. So whatever works, and everyone is free to go around, shop around, find what is working for them. So there is no one method, but the important thing is that cleaning up still has to happen.
Totally. That's what I'm focused on. Not so much because I think people will find their way. To me, the bigger message is, can we help people understand that the initial recognition is not going to be everything that they think it is. It's going to be the initial recognition. And that's, to me, the bigger message for me to get out, because a lot of us are conditioned to think, just like you said in the beginning, that I'm going to have this experience and then it's all just going to go away.
Lovely. Dream on. It's not.
Yeah. Dream.
And in my life, over these, 12, 13 years, I sometimes get into this process, which I call cosmic washing machine. Yeah. It feels like everything conspires into some intense situation.
Yeah, but that's a good thing. It can be when you really see that's all you. Yep.
Yeah. So it washes you, it spins you, it rinses you.
Yeah.
Then you get ironed in the end, and here you go.
Yeah.
Live for a little bit till the next cycle.
Completely. That's my experience. Totally. And it's a little bit messier than maybe people imagined it would be, because it's not, because if we imagine it to be like, I'm just going to awaken and then everything, but the actual experience is like that. It's more like ebb and flow, or there's something comes up and it gets resolved and then and that happens for a while, doesn't it? Until that stabilizes.
Yeah. And once it's stabilized, it's here you go. Have some more washing up to do.
Right. I always just like to stay open. For me, it's like at any given time, I just like to stay open to see what else is here. Because there's no seeking. As long as there's no seeking, there's no stress in that, right? Just staying open.
Yeah.
Because I have a history of bypassing, so I like to stay open to anything that might not be seen yet.
I think that's also a skill. It's not
Yeah.
everyone can do that.
No. Well, if you suffer long enough, you might learn to stay open. If you suffer long enough by closing down around things,
Well,
you know.
looking at my mom, she's the same.
Yeah.
So
Does she do this work, or she's like most moms and they just look at
no,
us
no.
doing?
She just has some stories that she cannot let go of, and no matter what you would say, it's her stories, and that's it.
Yeah.
Which I respect because it's not my life. That's
Right. If you want
all
to
she's
suffer, go ahead.
able and capable. That's fine. Yeah. And do you also notice, like, yes, over years, the teaching or the people's problems change? Like there is some kind of flow, there's some kind of common theme. Do you notice that or not?
Yeah, well, within the KI path, there are a lot of themes because it's a path to reverse repression. So you kind of have to go through these areas. Like,
Uh-huh.
for example, people start off our path in some degree, they're in denial. So they'll come and they'll say, I don't think I have anger. I don't think I buried emotion. And then we do the test and they're like, yeah, I buried anger. So there's a change right there. And as soon as
Mm-hmm.
they get here, something changes. But then when they go through this path, what they find is you come out of repression. So the very thing that you didn't think you have ends up being one of your strongest identifications. It was just buried. So buried hurt ends up being a very strong identification. So there's a phase that we go through where the buried emotions come into awareness and we see why and how we've held on to them because we're identified with them at an unconscious level. So that's a phase. And then when we get to that phase, this is a theme. And for people to completely heal here, I think they have to go through another phase where they see that they're creating it unconsciously, the suffering. They're creating it. In other words, they're not doing it consciously. But in
Mm-hmm.
order to stay safe and get love, we create our own blocks and triggers and different things, and we think it's out there. So we have to really come into the seeing that it's all created by me. That's another phase that people go through at the end. And that becomes really skillful, and they'll just start seeing the suffering go away because they're getting to the unconsciousness that's creating it.
Interesting. So in my world, if it's unconscious creation, it's not my creation. It's the mind.
Yeah, exactly. It's past. It's something like that.
Yeah, because there are so many talks now. Oh, you have to create your own reality. You have to get skills to create, manifest, and all that
Egos. Yeah.
woo-woo stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No. That's been difficult for me because when I say that, I don't mean a self creating. I don't, in order to be free, you can't be an ego that creates their own reality. You can't be a separate self that creates. What I'm talking about is from what we are no longer suffering, being able to feel and express your emotions authentically. So you're not getting hung up and triggered and stuck in different places. You're moving in life. That's what I mean by that is a freedom in relationship and in life that happens when it's embodied that you can't really have when you have repression and trauma.
Right. So the good test would be what's not working in your life.
This is a good place to start.
Yeah. What's not working?
What's not working? Are you
What,
suffering?
yeah. What am I avoiding? What I don't want to feel? What I don't want to acknowledge? What I
Yeah.
want to hide from myself? And
Yeah. And
please.
well, I was going to say, if we can all just kind of come to see we're all doing that, most of us, it doesn't make us feel bad about it. See, if we don't talk about it, that's one thing. But when we start talking about it and you share that you had buried emotions and I have buried emotions and everybody else does, we normalize it. We normalize the seeking or the healing of trauma as part of the path is how I see it. So more talking is good. It's what I see. More transparency,
Mm.
like you're doing.
Okay, and we come to this very important question.
Okay.
What is your best advice for the seeker? Like, to sum it up, best advice for the seeker.
Utilize the seeking to embody the presence. Don't just try to get rid of the seeking. There's a reason that seeking is there. It's escape from the unprocessed. If you miss that opportunity, that's a great opportunity to see that the seeking is coming from the trauma, to process it and begin to heal, not just awaken, but to heal from the trauma. You can utilize the seeking to begin the healing process from the beginning, but you don't really do that very well if you just try to end the seeking and don't see its connection to trauma.
Wow. Yes, if you are watching this, just stop right here, rewind, and listen again.
Yeah, right. Well, we have specific tools for people so they don't have to overthink it. Like you say, it's experiential. We're going to show you how to access it.
And how can people contact you or work with you or your team?
So if you go to Kilby.com, we have a members area where people come and learn the work on their own. There's about 1,000 people in there just learning and doing the work. And that's kind of self-paced. If they don't want to work with anybody, they don't have a lot of money. It's a monthly subscription. But many people are being mentored by me and other trainers, showing them how to do it. So there's a mentorship and training program. There's even a training program where we're, training people in this method so they go out and help others. And therapists and coaches and even teachers come to us quietly when they're bypassing.
Can I come? Can I come?
You absolutely can come.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, it's been very deep conversation with you and very revealing. I hope our listeners agree and they start digging for the gems.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the work you've done in the world, too.
Me too. I appreciate you, Scott, and your work and all your... What's amazing, when I look at our work in parallel, I'm doing the same, you're doing the same. Mm-hmm. Right? But you have these words, you put everything in a concept, in very clear definitions. Mm-hmm. And you kind of made the path much more available for the mind, like to understand what's going on.
Yeah. Can I say one more thing before we go about that?
Yes.
So what I learned is it's important in the embodiment process to have a context, because if we don't, our default context or conditioning takes over. Stay safe and get love becomes the context, or is the context for our life. So we brought it in a different context and understanding to help people not be run by the bypass if they don't have a context.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you for watching. Until next time. Bye for now.